Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In addition to the new DLC announcement and news, we also got a brand new patch for AoE2 that just dropped. Considering how much time the devs have probably been putting toward Age of Mythology, it's surprisingly ambitious, touching on a lot of different unit lines and introducing some new quality of life features. So let's check it out. Starting with the general gameplay, we have a brand new feature letting you star civilizations to make your own custom civ pool. The game will then randomly select from that list when you start the game, which is nice if you either have a variety of civs you like to rotate between, or if you want to exclude certain civilizations. If you just really don't want to play Britons, for example, you can star every civ except Britons, and just like that, you've effectively banned them from random civ selection. The next change is that pushing deer is about to get a lot easier, as they'll now ignore small obstacles that get in their way. Straggler trees, stone piles, etc. And while this feels like the kind of change that often creates weird knock-on effects elsewhere, in this case, with a quick check, it seems to work pretty well. Maybe the biggest change in the entire patch, though, comes at the market. First off, trade cart collision size is being cut in half, so you'll get less bumping in busy trade lines. That doesn't just mean a bit more gold, but should also hopefully prevent trade lines getting periodically clogged up in choke points as well. The market is then getting another major shakeup with the initial food prices being increased by 15 for both buying and selling. That's right, food inflation is now so out of control it's even made its way into AoE2. Clearly, the Fed started cutting interest rates way too early. What this means though is basically it's going to be harder to bypass farms and buy your way up to an early castle age, which I assume was the intention, as now it's as if a player has already bought 800 food and inflated the price. While I think it'll do what it's supposed to, an unfortunate side effect here is this hurts the Saracens, as using the market to buy food, especially by selling stone, used to be significantly more efficient from a villager time perspective than farming, thanks to their market bonus. There's still an argument for buying a bit of food, but nothing like what it was. It's a little unfortunate they can't exempt Saracens from the change, but the way market prices work globally across all players, there probably isn't a way to do that easily. On the flip side, if you're the first to start selling food now later in the game, you'll get an even better deal than before. Being the first to sell 500 food from these starting prices used to net you 336 gold, whereas now you'll get 389. The market is basically worse early on for forcing a better castle time, but better later, as food prices are falling from a higher starting point. Another interesting general change is that buildings can now place waypoints for units to follow instead of a single rally point. You just hold shift and place them like regular waypoints, so your units walk around castles, towers, or whatever else. This idea has never occurred to me, but now that it's here, I suspect it's one of those quality of life features that we'll wonder how we lived without. Next up, for some unit balance changes, the first big one is for battle and war elephants, which are having their conversion times increased by 2.5 seconds. Elephant archers are not affected, as they don't have the same issues with monks thanks to their range. Another generic change is the crossbow and arbalester upgrades have had their costs reduced by 25 gold and 50 gold respectively. Archer civs in general are kind of struggling on the latter, disproportionately filling the bottom tier, and while this isn't a dramatic change, it will help hit those power spikes a little bit easier. Moving on, Siege is also receiving some interesting buffs. First, all of the lower tier ram and armored elephant units' bonus damage against buildings is increasing a bit. Remember, rams were also made 20% faster not that long ago as well, on top of more garrison space and better garrison logic, so the devs want to see more rams apparently. A bigger shakeup then is that scorpion projectiles are now going to be affected by ballistics, which was previously a Roman's bonus, and now everyone gets it. Part of the issue with using scorpions to defend was always that they just miss so often against crossbows and cavalry archers, so this might actually be a pretty good buff for them, and make them more common to see. Speaking of helping out defenders though, palisade gates are now also going from 2 pierce armor to 4. Keep in mind, palisade walls have 5 pierce armor and feudal archers have 5 attack with fletching, so they previously did 1 damage to walls but 3 damage to gates, making them a significant weak point to not just melee but ranged units as well, whereas now archers will just do 1 damage each. I get that historically gates were often a weak point, so to make them a better target than walls makes a lot of sense, but basically all that was happening was players were deleting palisade walls to get in and out of their base because gates were so punishing. Crossbows are now going to take about 2/3 longer to break through them, and personally I like this change. There's still a weak point because of how many more melee units can target them at once, so I would say the original intention is still there. Next though, let's move on to the civilization-specific changes. Starting with the Aztecs, their military unit faster creation bonus is being modestly improved from plus 11% to plus 15%. I've said a lot on this already, but Aztecs are struggling on the ladder for a year plus, and it felt like they hit a tipping point when the Eagle Warriors' food cost went up, in addition to just being power crept by other civs. I don't know if this really changes where Aztecs are going to land, but you save a little over half a second on a militia and about 1 more second per archer, so it will help with early aggression at the least. That is where they struggle the most in the stats, so I think it does target the right sort of thing. Next up, for Bohemians, their Hussite wagons training time is increasing by a few seconds. Bohemians are doing really well these days, not just on Arena either, doing well for example on Hideout, Nomad, and Gold Rush. The Hussite wagon feels like a big part of that, and while this doesn't really change things that much, they're going to be harder to get rolling, literally. Moving on to a couple of water civs, Byzantines are getting a bit of a nerf to their fire ship and drone attack boost dropping from 25% to 20%, while the Dravidians' unique unit, the Therissidae, is having its range increased by 1 to match the Galleon. Dravidians pretty consistently outperform Byzantines on water across the board, so I'm not sure they needed the help, but neither of these feel like a massive change to me. Next up, for the Georgians, the Manaspa is getting hit with lower HP. This change leaves them with now 40 less HP than a Cavalier, albeit they're quite a bit cheaper in terms of gold and get the group attack boost. I expect this is primarily aiming at high-level players, where Georgians are doing very well on the latter. The Manaspa in particular has developed a bit of a reputation for being overtuned, and this may end up being the first of a few nerfs down the road. Moving on to the Huns, their free horse scout on Nomad starts is having its speed cut from 1.2 to 1.05 tiles per second, so basically from the speed of a Dark Age scout down to a moderately fast infantry. I've always felt the problem with it is more that it can collect sheep rather than being too fast, but arguably this gets at the same thing. Either way, the stats show that Huns have been totally broken on Land Nomad basically because of their horse, so a nerf was definitely warranted. To put it into perspective, Huns had a nearly 64% win rate on Land Nomad, while Mongols are doing the second best with just under 53%. Huns have been so dominant, it's been hard for even good civs to maintain a win rate above 50%. Personally, I expect Huns will still be over 60 even after this change, because let's face it, they still get a free scout that everyone else doesn't, but we'll have to see. Arguably, this unit should only be on Classic Nomad, where Huns have to play down an early dock, so it makes sense in that context, but why they get a free scout on strictly land maps with a Nomad start really doesn't make as much sense to me. Next up, for the Khmer, their Ballista Elephant unique units projectiles are now going to be affected by ballistics, just like Scorpions. This is actually a crazy good patch for Khmer, helping their Scorpions, unique unit, and also remember their Battle Elephants will resist conversion. They kind of look like the big winners of the patch, at least in terms of late game Black Forest Deathball stuff. Moving on to the Koreans, their elite turtle ship upgrade is becoming 350 food and 300 gold cheaper, while the turtle ship itself is also getting faster. I recently did a deep dive on the turtle ship, and the unit's not bad at what it's intended to do, but they're just so rare to see that I'm 100% okay with the buff. The elite upgrade actually isn't bad at all, giving 50% more HP, 1 more range, more armor, plus more hidden ship armor. Honestly, for its new price, it's up there as arguably one of the best elite upgrades for value, though it's hard to compare water and land units directly like that. Either way, buffing unique water units is a bit of a theme of this patch, and continuing that pattern, next for Portuguese, their Caravel training time is being massively cut, while the Organ Gun's training time is increased. The fact Caravels are now being made 44% faster than Galleons gives them a bit of a new niche as an easy-to-mass naval unit for retaking water on a smaller number of docks, which I actually really like the idea of now that I see it. The Organ Gun situation can then be very strong as well, so I get why they want to make that harder to mass. It's the same idea as with the Hussite wagon's slower training time to delay the Castle Age snowball. And last but not least is the Poles, who are getting a new bonus to make bloodlines, and the scout line upgrades cost 50% less food. The gold cost is unchanged, and keep in mind the Winged Hussar is 800 gold right there, but this saves you 450 food in total. Bloodlines is already an incredibly cost-effective tech, and you also have the potentially super discounted knights, with now the Hussar transition being cheaper and potentially with some splash damage. On top of amazing farmers when using your full work, Poles are looking like a lot of fun if you like using cavalry. Now just to end on a couple of other miscellaneous changes, the first is pathfinding is getting some attention. As always, I'm curious to see how that plays out. Another nice little feature is the scenario editor now has a search bar. Every new DLC makes the list a little more unwieldy than before, so this is definitely a good change. Overall, I have to say I like the patch. The market change is bold, the waypoints for newly created units is great, and generally the balance changes target the right things in my opinion across the board, with Khmer and Poles as big winners, but tanky unique units in Castle Age getting the short end of the stick. It feels like it's been a long time since the last patch, and it'll be fun to have some new things to play with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.